In our headlines on this Friday, November 14th, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung addressed his members of the media earlier this morning to announce the disclosure of the joint fact sheet detailing his discussions with his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump in Gyeongju late October. Also, the South Korean president is poised to embark on a diplomatic tour starting next Monday, November 17th, that will take him to the UAE, Egypt, South Africa, the G20 summit, and finally Turkey before his return home on the 26th of this month. Meanwhile, Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chul shares unease about the foreign exchange market here as the Korean won remains weak against major global counterparts. We started the Yongsan presidential office, where earlier this morning President Lee Jae-myung touched upon some of the details disclosed in the much-awaited joint document covering his talks with his American counterpart Donald Trump over 2 weeks ago in the historic city of Gyeongju. Our correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
President Lee Jae-myung himself announced some of the fact sheet's key points on Friday morning.
우리 경제와 안보의 최대 변수 가운데 하나였던 한미 무역 통상 협상 및 안보 협의가 최종적으로 타결됐습니다.
On the trade front, President Lee said the previously agreed upon investments worth hundreds of billions of dollars to lower the U.S. tariffs will be made in projects that are commercially reasonable.
원금 회수가 어려운 사업에 투자를 빙자한 사실상 공여가 이루어지는 것 아니냐라는 일각의 불신과 우려 또한 확실하게 불식하게 됐습니다.
He went on to say that the deal will elevate the Korea-U.S. alliance to a new level to involve cutting-edge industries like AI and semiconductors. On the security front, the allies have agreed to cooperate on South Korea building nuclear power submarines, which requires U.S. support under the current bilateral nuclear energy agreement.
우라늄 농축과 사용 후 핵연료 재처리 권한 확대에 대해서도 미국 정부의 지지를 확보하는 데 성공했습니다.
The South Korean commander-in-chief also said the two sides have reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to the presence of U.S. forces Korea and to continued cooperation for the transition of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul.
한미 동맹은 안보와 경제, 첨단 기술을 포괄하는 진정한 미래형 전략적 포괄 동맹으로 발전 심화하게 되었습니다.
Friday's announcement comes about 2 weeks after Lee and Trump met in Gyeongju, longer than expected, over reported differences over issues related to nuclear power submarines. As he thanked the people for their trust in the government, as well as his U.S. counterpart, Donald Trump, for his rational decision, the president commented that he found himself frustrated due to pressure at home by some over the prolonged trade talks. President Lee added it's more of a start than a final end, as each country will continue to fight to defend its own national interests, and global uncertainties will not be resolved in a short amount of time. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And as our Chung-min earlier said, the joint document details tariff rates and investment initiatives between South Korea and the U.S. Our economic correspondent Moon Ji-young has more.
The joint fact sheet highlights the key trade agreements reached between the two countries, with the U.S. lowering tariffs on South Korean-made automobiles from 25% to 15%. The document also reconfirms Washington's existing pledge that semiconductor tariffs will not disadvantage Korea compared to other nations.
On Section 232 on semiconductor tariffs, Korea secured terms effectively on par with major competitors such as Taiwan, ensuring equally favorable conditions should the U.S. strike a future deal with larger trading partners.
In return for these adjustments, the fact sheet outlines Seoul's pledge of $350 billion in investments in the U.S. Of this, $150 billion is slated for the U.S. shipbuilding sector, with another $200 billion to be allocated to strategic investments under an upcoming memorandum of understanding between the two countries. Notably, safety measures were also put in place to ensure the stability of Seoul's foreign exchange market. These include the provision that the U.S. will not demand more than $20 billion annually in investments under the MOU, and that Korea can request adjustments to the amount and timing of funds raised. Regarding non-tariff barriers, Seoul prevented any additional opening of its agricultural market for sensitive products like rice and beef. The Trade Ministry said the tariff agreement served to further solidify trust between the two nations.
Building on this agreement, both nations anticipate accelerated industrial supply chain cooperation through mutually beneficial projects under the Strategic Investment Memorandum of Understanding. Seoul also aims to further boost its industrial competitiveness and facilitate expanded market access for Korean companies in the U.S. by thoroughly preparing all necessary procedures.
On the same day, the White House also formalized the details of the trade agreement, releasing the joint fact sheet from the South Korea-U.S. summit. However, the fact sheet did not specify the effective date for lowering the current 25% tariffs on automobiles and auto parts to 15%. 문지영, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Seoul-Washington fact sheet also sets in stone U.S. support of a future fleet of South Korean nuclear-powered submarines. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has details.
Making the joint fact sheet release public, President Lee Jae-myung announced the U.S.'s support for South Korea's plan to build nuclear-powered submarines.
이번 협상을 통해 한미 양국은 대한민국의 수십 년 수건이자 한반도 평화와 안정을 위한 필수 전략 자산인 핵 추진 잠수함 건조를 추진하기로 함께 뜻을 모았습니다.
Calling it a meaningful step in national security, he added that South Korea also secured the U.S. government's support in expanding the rights related to uranium enrichment and spent nuclear fuel reprocessing. The White House, too, released a fact sheet where it said the U.S. has given approval for South Korea to build nuclear-powered attack submarines and that it will work closely to meet requirements for this shipbuilding project, including avenues to source fuel. Eyes were on where the project was going to take place, and National Security Advisor Ri Sung-lak said discussions on the issue were conducted on the premise, from beginning to end, that it would be in Korea. Two countries reaffirmed the U.S.'s firm commitment to the stationing of the USFK and to extended deterrence. For this, South Korea agreed to provide comprehensive support worth $33 billion US, about 47 trillion Korean won, and the two countries are to boost cooperation through consultation mechanisms, including the Nuclear Consultative Group. Seoul showed its will to boost military capabilities as well.
국방력 강화와 전작권 환수를 통해 한반도 방위에 대한 우리의 주도적 의지를 천명했고 미국은 이를 지지하며 지원하겠다는 의지를 강력히 피력했습니다.
For this, South Korea is to increase its defense spending to 3.5% of GDP and is to spend $25 billion US on U.S. military equipment purchases by 2030. With such measures documented, the two sides aim to deepen their alliance into one that is future-oriented and strategically comprehensive. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The presidential office in Yongsan has disclosed details of the president's upcoming diplomatic trip to the UAE, Egypt, South Africa and Turkey starting November 17th. Our correspondent Song Yu-jin has more.
President Lee Jae-myung is set for his longest overseas trip since taking office, a 10-day four-nation tour that begins Monday.
저는 다음 주 G20 정상회의 참석차 남아프리카 공화국으로 출국합니다.
The president will attend the two-day G20 Leader Summit in South Africa, where members will discuss solidarity, equality, and sustainability.
We will make sure that the visions we set out at the APEC leaders meeting, such as creating a global AI society and promoting recovery and growth, will be discussed at the G20 as well. We will also share our fiscal and climate policies so that South Korea can help lead relevant policy discussions.
Before and after the G20 summit, Yi will visit 3 Middle Eastern nations, the UAE, Egypt, and Turkey. His first stop will be the United Arab Emirates for a state visit.
The UAE is our only special strategic partner in the Middle East. Through this visit, President Yi's first to the region since taking office, we plan to expand cooperation beyond the 4 key areas of investment, defense, nuclear power, and energy, into advanced technology, healthcare, and culture.
In Abu Dhabi, Yi will hold a summit with President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, followed by an MOU signing ceremony and lunch. The MOUs will cover areas including artificial intelligence, business cooperation, and defense. The president will also meet business leaders from both countries, as well as the Korean Special Forces stationed in the UAE. He will then travel to Egypt, marking the 30th anniversary of diplomatic ties between the two countries. Alongside a summit with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Yi will deliver a lecture at Cairo University outlining the administration's Middle East strategy. For his last stop following the G20 summit in South Africa, President Yi will make a state visit to Turkey, where he is expected to discuss strengthening the country's strategic partnership in defense, nuclear energy, and biotechnology with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Having wrapped up major trade and security negotiations with the United States, President Yi now turns to an extensive round of multilateral and bilateral diplomacy. His trip this time is expected to widen the scope of South Korea's pragmatic diplomacy to the global south. 송유진, Arirang News.
As mentioned in that report, next weekend, South Africa is scheduled to host this year's Group of 20 summit, and U.S. President Donald Trump has pledged to boycott the event. The leaders of China and Russia will be absent as well. Our Kim Do-yeon explains.
For the first time since G20 was founded in 1999, the leaders of the 3 major superpowers, the United States, China, and Russia, will all be absent from the upcoming summit. The high-profile snubs are casting a shadow over the event in Johannesburg, which is the first ever G20 summit to be hosted on the African continent. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced on Thursday Premier Li Chang will represent President Xi Jinping. However, Beijing emphasized its continued support for the forum.
As the main forum for international economic cooperation, the G20 should strengthen solidarity and cooperation, jointly tackle challenges, improve global economic governance, and make positive contributions to promoting world economic growth and common prosperity.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin, who has an international criminal court arrest warrant issued against him, will also be absent. His delegation will be led by presidential aide Maxim Oreshkin. However, the most significant development is the complete withdrawal of the United States. President Donald Trump declared his non-attendance on social media on November 7th, stating it is truly shameful that the G20 is being held in South Africa. He also said no U.S. representatives would attend. President Trump has repeatedly cited allegations of South Africa's government taking private farmland for public use and violence against white farmers in the country.
Terrible things are happening in South Africa. The leadership is doing some terrible things, horrible things. So that's under investigation right now. We'll make a determination.
The move creates an unprecedented diplomatic situation as the U.S. is the incoming G20 chair and is set to take over the presidency at the summit's conclusion. South Africa has strongly rebutted President Trump's allegations. President Cyril Ramaphosa dismissed the U.S. boycott, stating the G20 will proceed.
The G20 will go. All other heads of state will be. In the end, we will take fundamental decisions, and their absence is their loss.
Other leaders from Argentina and Mexico are also skipping, though European, Brazilian, and Turkish leaders are set to attend. With the 3 main superpowers absent, concerns are growing that the historic first G20 on African soil has been tarnished before it has even begun. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the longest federal government shutdown in U.S. history came to a close late Wednesday, but it appears it will take time for operations to return to normal, especially at airports. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
The longest government shutdown in United States history is officially over. U.S. President Donald Trump signed a temporary funding bill on Wednesday night local time after it was passed by Congress, bringing an end to a federal government operations freeze which lasted 43 days. Agencies are now beginning the process of reopening, but a return to normal will not happen overnight. Hundreds of thousands of federal workers are still waiting for back pay, and disruptions to air travel are expected to continue for several days.
Just making sure that my flights leave, depart, and lands on time. I don't get routed somewhere else that I don't want to go. I just want to get home safely.
Some effects could last much longer. National parks face steep revenue losses from weeks without visitors, and taxpayers may experience significant delays on refunds as the Internal Revenue Service works through a heavy backlog. Also, the funding measure signed by President Trump only runs through January 30th, meaning the threat of another shutdown remains on the horizon. For many agencies, the directive to resume operations went out even before the president signed the bill. Meanwhile, many federal workers have begun returning to work. Workers at Health and Human Services, the Department of Justice, the Department of the Interior, and Housing and Urban Development were all told to return to their offices. At the State Department, an email sent Wednesday night informed staff to report the next morning, citing the passage of the short-term resolution. For many, the end of the longest government shutdown in history was welcome news.
I very much look forward to going back to work as soon as possible.
With the government now reopening, officials warned that restoring full operations will take time. Agencies are gearing up to address wide-ranging delays, while millions of Americans wait to feel the effects of federal services coming back online. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And North Korea on Friday rebuked the recent statement by the Group of 7 countries that reaffirmed their commitment to complete denuclearization of the regime. According to its state-run media, Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee called the G7 foreign minister statement reached in Canada this week a, quote, disguised hostile act, one that challenged North Korea's constitution. She further claimed that Pyongyang's possession of nuclear weapons was the most appropriate manner of deterring dangerous and hostile nations in today's geopolitical climate. Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chul has shared unease about the foreign exchange market as the won remains weak against the US dollar. Our Ian Jin covers his remarks and more.
Addressing the recent increase of uncertainty in the foreign exchange market, Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chul has said South Korea will actively utilize all available policy tools if the situation persists where the foreign exchange supply and demand remain imbalanced. Koo made the remarks on Friday during a meeting with the chiefs of the Bank of Korea, the Financial Services Commission, and the Financial Supervisory Service. Concern was expressed over the $1 exchange rate, weakening to 1,471 on Thursday, driven by factors like overseas investment. They warned that persistent imbalances would further weaken the won, which would significantly limit the exchange rate's downward flexibility, and agreed on the need for structural improvement to the foreign exchange supply and demand. Earlier on Friday, the won to dollar exchange rate strengthened by 19 won to an intraday low of 1,455.9 won. Also on Friday, Finance Minister Koo spoke at a ceremony held at the government complex in Seoul, launching the Mid to Long-Term Strategy Committee. This advisory body to the Finance Ministry was first established in 2012, tasked with establishing national future strategies to address challenges in areas including industrial technology innovation, demographic changes, and climate change, and providing policy recommendations in relevant fields. The 7th edition of this committee will be led by former chairman of Samsung Electronics, Kwon Oh-yeon. Ian Jin, Arirang News.
Foreign investors continued their purchase of South Korean stocks for the 6th month in a row in October. According to the Financial Supervisory Service on this Friday, they net bought over 4.2 trillion won worth of domestically listed stocks last month. In fact, as of the end of October, foreign investors held 1,248.9 trillion won in Korean listed stocks, accounting for over 30% of the total market capitalization. In the bond market, meanwhile, foreign investors turn to net withdrawals for the first time in a month, with a net redemption of 178 billion won.
It will be mostly sunny until the weekend, and late autumn conditions will continue. However, a small amount of rain is forecast in central parts of the country and Jeollabuk-do province from late afternoon to the night on Sunday. After the rain stops, the weather will get cold rapidly. A dry weather advisory is in effect for the east coast of Gangwon-do province. The atmosphere around the east coast area is very dry, so please take extra precautions to avoid causing any wildfires. Seoul and Daegu will start off at 4 degrees Celsius tomorrow morning, with Chuncheon at 0 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 15 to 19 degrees all over the country. The first sub-zero cold of this fall will appear in Seoul, with the morning temperature in Seoul dropping to 1 degree Celsius on Monday and minus 3 degrees on Tuesday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session. Do stay with us, and thank you for now.